For 13 years, I had given everything to my wife's father's company. My time, my energy, my ideas, and my loyalty. I had worked through weekends, missed vacations, and sacrificed sleep, all to transform the struggling firm into an empire worth $85 million. It wasn't just a business to me. It was my creation. I had built it from the ground up, turning failed ventures into strategic successes, closing deals that others deemed impossible, and making my father-in-law's name synonymous with power and prestige. Yet, as I sat at the grand dining table that evening, surrounded by family members who had no idea of the storm brewing beneath my calm exterior, I heard the words that changed everything. "Your wife's new husband will take over now." The voice belonged to my wife. Her tone was smooth, practiced, like she had rehearsed saying it. Her father, seated at the head of the table, merely smiled in agreement, as if this was just another business decision, another shift in power that I should accept without question. My grip on the silverware tightened, but I forced my expression to remain neutral. I refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing my anger, my betrayal. The betrayal of a man who had dedicated his life to a cause, only to be cast aside like an employee whose contract had expired. I glanced around the table. The rest of the family was chatting, eating, oblivious to the significance of what had just been said. Or maybe they knew, but they had chosen to stay silent, unwilling to challenge the patriarch's decision. That was how it had always been. What he said was law. And I had been a fool. A fool to believe that loyalty mattered. A fool to think that years of hard work and sacrifice would make me irreplaceable. A fool to assume that my wife, the woman I had built a life with, saw me as her partner rather than a placeholder. Her new husband. I looked at her then, truly looked at her, and realized something I should have seen long ago. She had never fought for me, never stood up for me, never challenged her father's authority, even when his choices were unfair. She had simply played the role of the obedient daughter, the princess waiting for her father to arrange the best possible deal for her. And now, she had been promised to another man. Not because I had failed her, not because I was lacking, but because I was no longer useful to them. I placed my fork down gently, smoothing my napkin over my lap, maintaining the mask of control that had carried me through countless business meetings. I wouldn't react, not here, not now. They expected anger, they expected resistance, they expected me to protest like a man who didn't see the game they were playing. But I saw it now. The room filled with laughter, the clinking of glasses, the hum of conversation. And yet, to me, everything had gone silent. I had built them an empire, and they thought they could hand it over to another man while I walked away quietly. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dim glow of my study, staring at the documents stacked neatly on my desk. Financial records, contracts, agreements, all the proof of what I had given to this company, to this family. They had underestimated me. They thought I was just the workhorse, the fool who had built their fortune while they held the reins. But they had forgotten something important. The horse they had ridden for 13 years had learned to run without a rider. And if they thought I would simply walk away from everything I had built, they were gravely mistaken. By 3 a.m., I sat alone in my home office, the glow of my laptop screen illuminating the determination on my face. Sleep had no place in my mind tonight. Adrenaline coursed through my veins as I combed through every document, every contract, every financial statement I had ever signed. The betrayal from earlier that evening still rang in my ears like a haunting echo. "Your wife's new husband will take over now." Those words should have broken me. They should have shattered my resolve. But instead, they had ignited something far more powerful, an unwavering fire to take back what was mine. For 13 years, I had been methodical. While my father-in-law had played the respectable businessman and my wife had lived in luxury, I had been making moves, subtle, quiet, but undeniably strategic. I was not a fool. I had seen the way power shifted in this family, how loyalty was never a guarantee, how the only person I could ever truly trust was myself. And so, I had ensured that my control over the company was not just symbolic. It was legal, ironclad, and absolute. My fingers flew across the keyboard as I pulled up the executive shareholders agreement. The numbers stared back at me, a stark reminder of what I had orchestrated over the years. 62%. That was how much of the company I owned. Not my father-in-law. Not my wife. Not the stranger they had handpicked as my replacement. Me. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. They thought they had boxed me into a corner, but they had no idea that I had already built an escape route. They expected me to disappear quietly. Instead, I was going to remind them exactly who they were dealing with. As the clock struck 8:45 a.m., I walked into the company headquarters, not as a man who had been discarded, but as a man who was about to burn their carefully laid plans to the ground. The lobby was already bustling with employees, executives, and assistants moving between meetings. Some offered me nods of respect, others glanced at me with uncertainty. The whispers had already started. Did he hear the news? Will he step down? What's he going to do? I ignored them. I wasn't here for rumors. I was here for war. Taking the elevator to the top floor, I strode into my office, my presence alone sending a wave of tension through the space. My assistant, Danielle, looked up from her desk, her face betraying none of the chaos that must have been circling through the company grapevine. She had been with me for nearly a decade, loyal, sharp, and always 2 steps ahead. "Schedule a board meeting for noon," I said, setting my briefcase down. She hesitated only for a second before nodding. "Understood. Anything else?" "Yes," I said, my voice calm. "Call the legal team. I want them ready." Her gaze flickered with understanding. The fight had begun. By the time I settled into my chair, I was already anticipating their next move. My father-in-law would waste no time. He would call in his favors, push the executives to accept the transition, frame it as a necessary shift in leadership. He would use my wife's name to solidify his argument. After all, who would question a man passing his business to his daughter and her new husband? The problem was, I wasn't just a name on a piece of paper. I was the name on the contracts that mattered. At exactly 9 a.m., as if on cue, my office door swung open without so much as a knock. My father-in-law entered first, his presence as overbearing as ever, followed by my wife, her posture poised as if this was nothing more than another meeting. And then, he walked in. The so-called new husband. Tall, young, confident, exactly the type of man my father-in-law would consider worthy of taking my place. He exuded arrogance, a smugness that came from believing he had already won. I almost laughed. "I assume you're aware of the transition," my father-in-law said, his voice carrying the weight of expectation. I leaned back in my chair, steepling my fingers together. Transition? Interesting choice of words. The man beside my wife smirked, as if he found this amusing. I ignored him. He was nothing more than a placeholder, a pawn in someone else's game. My focus was on the real threat, the man who had orchestrated this betrayal in the first place. "We need you to oversee the handover," my father-in-law continued. "We expect full cooperation." I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. They really thought they had everything figured out. "You don't have the authority to make that decision," I said, my voice eerily calm. A flicker of irritation passed over his face. My wife's expression barely shifted, but the smug look on her new husband's face faltered. I reached for the remote on my desk and pressed a button. Behind me, the massive screen on the wall lit up, displaying the executive shareholders agreement. Their eyes darted to the document. Confusion set in first, then panic. "This document states that any transfer of power requires approval from the majority shareholder," I said, watching as the reality of the situation dawned on them. And that would be me. Silence. Heavy. Unmistakable. For the first time, my father-in-law's mask of composure cracked. "This is impossible," he muttered. "No," I corrected, my voice cutting through the tension. "What's impossible is thinking I would spend 13 years building something only to let you steal it from me." I turned my gaze to my wife. "Did you really think I wouldn't see this coming?" I asked her, my voice laced with disappointment. She didn't answer. Her hands tightened into fists at her sides. I let the silence stretch between us before shifting my attention to the man standing beside her, the one who had walked in thinking he was about to inherit an empire. "You have 2 choices," I told him. "You can work under me, or you can walk out that door and never step foot in this company again." His face turned red, his jaw clenched. He looked at my wife, then at my father-in-law. He had expected a victory lap, not a public humiliation. He stormed out without a word. My father-in-law hesitated for a fraction of a second before following. My wife lingered for a moment longer. She met my gaze, searching for something. Anger, regret, weakness. She found none. I had spent years building this empire, and if they thought they could take it from me, they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The air in my office was thick with tension long after my father-in-law and my so-called replacement had stormed out. My wife was still standing there, her hands clenched at her sides, her carefully curated mask of indifference slipping ever so slightly. She wasn't used to losing. Neither was her father. But today, they had lost. I leaned back in my chair, watching her closely. She was waiting for me to break the silence, to give her something. An explanation, an argument, a reaction. But I wasn't playing that game anymore. "You knew," she finally said, her voice quiet but edged with something sharp. "You knew all along." I tilted my head slightly, as if considering her words. What exactly did I know? Her nostrils flared. "Don't play dumb. You knew what my father was planning. You knew he was going to transition the company to—" She stopped herself before saying his name. She didn't have to. I let out a slow breath, tapping my fingers on the desk. "Of course I knew," I said smoothly. "I know how your father operates. He's predictable. He thinks power is something he can shuffle around like a deck of cards. He underestimated me, just like you did." Her lips pressed into a thin line. "This doesn't have to be a war, you know." I laughed, the sound dry and humorless. "It already is, darling." Her gaze flickered to the massive screen behind me, still displaying the shareholder agreement, the document that had just dismantled all of their carefully laid plans. I saw the realization in her eyes, the understanding that the life she had expected, the seamless transition she had envisioned, had just gone up in flames. "So what now?" she asked. "You think you can just keep me out? That my father will accept this?" I stood up, slowly, deliberately, and rounded the desk. She stiffened slightly as I stopped right in front of her. "Let's get something straight," I said, my voice low. "Your father doesn't run this company anymore. I do. If you want to stay in this game, you'll do it on my terms." She scoffed. "You don't control me." I smiled. "No, but I control what matters. And right now, that's the future of this company. If you thought I was going to just step aside and let you and your new husband waltz in, you don't know me as well as you think." Her jaw tightened. She had always been good at masking her emotions, but I knew her too well. She was panicking. "This isn't over," she whispered, her voice carrying more desperation than confidence. "Oh, I know," I said. "It's just beginning." She turned on her heel and left, slamming the door behind her. I exhaled, rolling my shoulders back. The first battle had been won, but the war was far from over. I had thrown a wrench in their plans, but I knew my father-in-law well enough to understand that he wasn't the type to accept defeat easily. He had spent decades building his reputation, surrounding himself with people who feared him, admired him, obeyed him. I was about to become the one thing he had never accounted for, his equal, or worse for him, his superior. I pressed the intercom button on my desk. "Danielle, call a board meeting. Noon." "Understood," she replied instantly. I needed to secure my position before my father-in-law tried to rally the board against me. Money and influence could make people disloyal in a heartbeat, and I wasn't naive enough to think I didn't have enemies among the executives. I walked over to the window, looking down at the city below. I had spent over a decade building this empire, and for what? To be discarded? Replaced? Humiliated? No, not a chance. At noon, the boardroom was filled with executives. Some of them looked anxious, others neutral. A few were clearly waiting to see which way the tide would turn before choosing a side. I took my seat at the head of the table. "I know many of you have heard rumors," I began, my voice steady. "So let me clear them up. Yes, my father-in-law intended to replace me. No, that will not be happening." Murmurs rippled through the room. I let them speak amongst themselves for a moment before continuing. "I've built this company into what it is today. Every deal, every expansion, every strategic move, I've been at the center of it. And I won't allow a man who hasn't spent a single day working here to walk in and take what I built. One of the executives, a man I had always respected, cleared his throat. Your father-in-law has significant influence. He could make things difficult. I met his gaze head-on. Perhaps. But let me make one thing clear. If anyone in this room believes that backing him is the right move, speak now. Silence. Heavy, deafening silence. Good. Loyalty matters, I continued, my tone softer but no less firm. And those who stand with me now will be rewarded. Those who don't? Well, you should know me well enough to understand that I don't forget disloyalty. I let my words settle. This was a game of power, and I had just made my position clear. By the time the meeting ended, I had secured the support I needed. My father-in-law could try to fight me, but he was about to learn something important. I wasn't the man he thought he could control. By the time I returned to my office, Danielle was waiting at the door. Your father-in-law called, she said. He wants to meet. I smiled. Of course he did. Tell him I'll see him tomorrow, I said. At my convenience. As she walked away, I sat back in my chair, exhaling slowly. The battle lines had been drawn, and I had no intention of losing. By the time I stepped into my office the next morning, the weight of what had happened over the last 24 hours was still sinking in. My father-in-law had miscalculated, badly. He had spent years believing he could manipulate, control, and discard me like a piece on his chessboard. He hadn't accounted for the fact that I wasn't just another pawn. I was the one who had built the kingdom, and now I was the one who held the power to burn it down. My phone buzzed on the desk. I glanced at the screen. Unknown number. I knew exactly who it was before I even picked up. Speak. A familiar voice crackled through the line. You think you've won? I smirked, leaning back in my chair. I know I have. A slow, measured exhale came from the other end. You've made a mistake, son. A mistake that's going to cost you everything. That's funny, I said, twirling a pin between my fingers. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like the only mistake was thinking you could take what's mine. Silence. I let it stretch between us, savoring the shift in dynamic. For years, my father-in-law had spoken to me with authority, with the certainty that I would always fall in line. Today, for the first time, that authority was gone. We should meet, he finally said, his voice tight. We should, I agreed. But on my terms. My office. 1 hour. I hung up before he could argue. I wasn't going to let him control the setting, the tone, or the circumstances. If he wanted a discussion, it would be on my turf, under my rules. The next 60 minutes passed in strategic preparation. I had Danielle pull up every document, every financial report, and every legal agreement that mattered. I wanted them printed and stacked neatly on my desk, not because I needed to review them, but because I wanted him to see them, to understand that I wasn't just prepared. I was untouchable. At exactly 10 o'clock, the door to my office swung open. My father-in-law walked in, his presence as imposing as ever, dressed in his usual crisp suit. He was followed closely by my wife, ex-wife, really, though she hadn't realized it yet, and trailing behind her, the man they had chosen to replace me. I ignored him entirely. He wasn't important enough to acknowledge. Instead, I leaned back in my chair and gestured to the seats across from me. Sit. They did. Reluctantly. You think you can just lock me out of my own company? My father-in-law's voice was sharp, laced with barely concealed fury. I smiled. I don't think. I know. I tapped the stack of papers on my desk. 62%, remember? That's my share. Which means I make the decisions now. Not you. Not her. I nodded toward my wife, whose expression remained unreadable. And definitely not him. Her so-called new husband shifted in his seat, uncomfortable. This is a family business, my father-in-law pushed. And you're no longer family. I tilted my head. Funny. You had no problem with me being family when I was the one securing multi-million-dollar contracts, expanding the business, and cleaning up your financial messes. His jaw clenched. I continued. You're right about one thing, though. This is a family business. But see, I was smart enough to make sure that blood ties don't equal ownership. I slid a document across the desk. "This is the revised executive structure I filed this morning," I said casually. "Effective immediately, your title as chairman is revoked. Your board privileges are suspended. Your access to financial accounts? Gone. You no longer hold a single voting right in this company." My father-in-law's face turned red. "You can't do that." I raised an eyebrow. "I already did. My wife, ex-wife," leaned forward, her voice softer but no less sharp. "Why are you doing this?" I turned my gaze to her, finally giving her my full attention. "Why?" I repeated. "You really have to ask?" She didn't flinch, but I saw the flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "You stood by while your father plotted to erase me," I said, my voice steady. "You let him decide that I was disposable. You sat there at dinner, smiling, while he handed my legacy to someone else like I was nothing more than an employee who had overstayed his welcome. I didn't. You did." I cut her off. "And now, you get to watch as everything you thought was yours slips through your fingers." Silence. The man beside her, her new husband, was visibly uncomfortable. He had come here expecting a smooth transition, a welcoming handoff. Instead, he was sitting in the room with the man he had tried to replace, realizing just how out of his depth he truly was. I turned back to my father-in-law. "You built this company, but I made it an empire. And now? Now, I own the empire." I stood up, buttoning my suit jacket. "I suggest you start making peace with that." For the first time in his life, my father-in-law looked at me not with control, not with arrogance, but with something close to fear. He had underestimated me, and now he was paying the price. He stood abruptly, shoving his chair back. "You'll regret this." I smiled. "No, you will." He turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind him. My wife hesitated. For a brief moment, I saw something in her eyes. Maybe regret, maybe realization, but it didn't matter anymore. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. She turned without another word and followed her father out. I finally turned to the man who had been left behind, the one they had planned to install in my place. He swallowed hard. "Look, man, I cut him off with a single glance. "Get out." He scrambled to his feet and all but ran out of my office. As the door closed behind him, I exhaled slowly, letting the silence settle. The battle wasn't over yet. But today, I had one. And I wasn't done winning. The morning after the confrontation, the weight of my victory still lingered in the air, thick and undeniable. But I knew better than to celebrate too soon. My father-in-law wasn't the type to bow out quietly. No, he would retreat, regroup, and come back swinging. He had spent decades building his power, surrounding himself with men who owed him favors, men who would gladly stab me in the back if it meant securing their own positions. Which was why I had to move first. I arrived at the office earlier than usual, stepping into the sleek glass tower that bore my legacy. The employees who had once greeted me with polite smiles now looked at me with something different: hesitation, uncertainty. The whispers were growing louder. The company had become a battlefield overnight, and everyone was waiting to see which side would come out on top. Danielle was already waiting in my office when I walked in, her hands resting on a thick stack of files. She had worked with me long enough to know that I wouldn't be resting after yesterday's events. "They're rallying," she said without preamble. I didn't need to ask who they were. "How many?" I asked, taking off my jacket and draping it over the chair. "5 board members met with your father-in-law late last night. 3 more were contacted this morning. He's offering them incentives, bonuses, future positions, anything to convince them to vote against you in the next emergency board meeting." I smirked, shaking my head. Predictable. "He's desperate," I mused, taking a seat and glancing over the documents she had prepared. "Desperate men can be dangerous," she warned. She was right. My father-in-law was many things, but he was never a man who accepted defeat easily. If he couldn't beat me fairly, he'd try to do it by force, by twisting the narrative, by making me look unstable or incapable, which meant I had to make my next move loud enough that no one dared challenge me again. I flipped open one of the files, scanning the contents. It was a detailed audit of the company's financials, one my father-in-law never expected anyone to see. You went digging, I said, lifting an eyebrow at Danielle. You pay me to be thorough, she responded with a shrug. I leaned back, taking my time to absorb the numbers in front of me. Hidden losses, mismanaged funds, embezzlement disguised as business expenses. My father-in-law wasn't just trying to push me out. He was trying to cover his own tracks. I exhaled slowly, tapping my fingers against the desk. How much does the board know? Nothing. He's kept it buried well. And if we release this? Danielle hesitated for a fraction of a second. It would destroy him. I nodded, my mind already working through the angles. Schedule a board meeting, I said. For when? Today. Her eyes flickered with understanding. No hesitation. No second-guessing. I'll make the calls. The battle lines had been drawn, and today, I was going to end it. By noon, the boardroom was filled with executives, each of them wearing carefully guarded expressions. They knew something was coming. My father-in-law was already seated at the far end of the table, his posture stiff, his eyes locked onto me the moment I entered. I didn't look away. I took my seat at the head of the table, allowing the silence to stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable. I called this meeting for one reason, I said finally, my voice even, to discuss the future of this company. A few of the board members exchanged glances. My father-in-law leaned forward, his fingers interlaced. The future is already being decided, he said smoothly. The question is whether you'll accept it or fight it. I smiled, tilting my head slightly. Oh, I'm not fighting it. I'm shaping it. I reached into the folder in front of me, pulled out a thick stack of documents, and slid them across the table. These are the company's financial records, I announced, watching as the executives leaned in, specifically records of mismanaged funds, hidden debts, and unauthorized transactions. The reaction was immediate. Murmurs rippled through the room, eyes darting toward my father-in-law. This is nonsense, he snapped. Is it? I challenged, flipping to a specific page and turning the document toward him. Because this right here? This is a record of $14 million funneled into offshore accounts under your name. The room fell silent. One of the board members, a man who had always been one of my father-in-law's closest allies, cleared his throat. Is this true? My father-in-law's expression barely flickered, but I saw the tension in his shoulders. He was cornered, and he knew it. This is a private family matter, he said, his voice quieter now. No, I corrected, my tone sharp. This is a corporate matter. And as the majority shareholder, I have a duty to protect this company from corruption. More murmurs. The tide was shifting. I leaned forward, driving my point home. You wanted to take everything from me. Instead, you just handed me everything I need to take you down. A long pause. Then, finally, my father-in-law exhaled slowly, his gaze meeting mine. For the first time, he looked truly defeated. What do you want? He asked. Your resignation, I said without hesitation. Effective immediately. More silence. Then, to my surprise, he nodded. Fine. A quiet gasp from one of the board members. Even my wife, ex-wife, looked startled. And the shares, I added. Transfer them to me. My father-in-law clenched his jaw. You're pushing it. No, I said simply. I'm ending it. A long pause. Then, finally, he sighed, pushing the documents back toward me. You really are ruthless, he muttered. I smirked. I learned from the best. And just like that, it was over. My father-in-law left the company that day. My wife didn't follow him, not immediately. She lingered, watching me, but I didn't spare her a second glance. I had one, and nothing would ever be the same again. By the next morning, the entire city knew what had happened. The headlines splashed across business news outlets were as brutal as they were satisfying. Corporate power shift, the end of an era at Hastings Enterprises. Chairman resigns amidst financial misconduct allegations. Hastings' empire crumbles, the rise of its true architect. I sat in my office, sipping my morning coffee, reading through each article with a quiet satisfaction. The war was over. The battlefield was mine. My father-in-law had been forced into resignation, stripped of the company he had once commanded. His shares, once a symbol of his iron grip, were now in my name. And the best part? He hadn't even tried to fight back, because he knew he had lost. Danielle entered without knocking, holding a tablet. You made every front page. Some say you're a genius. Others are calling you ruthless. I smirked. Both are true. She set the tablet down and gave me a pointed look. You should know something. Your ex-wife has been calling. Repeatedly. I didn't react. I had been expecting that. Let her call. Danielle hesitated. She also came by the building earlier. Security turned her away. I exhaled slowly. She's not used to being ignored. Clearly, Danielle muttered, before shaking her head. One more thing, you're getting interview requests. Bloomberg, Forbes, even a few international networks. Everyone wants a comment. I chuckled. They want to know how I managed to dismantle a legacy in under a week? Something like that. I leaned back in my chair, considering. The truth was, I had no interest in feeding the media frenzy. Let them speculate. Let them build their narratives about power, betrayal, and corporate warfare. The only thing that mattered was control, and I had secured it. Decline all of them, I said. Danielle raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. She knew me well enough to understand that I didn't do anything for public approval. And my schedule for today? I asked. You have a meeting with the new board at 2 p.m., she said. They're eager to know what direction you want to take the company in now that it's fully yours. I nodded. Good. Make sure all financial reports are on my desk before then. I want to go in with every number at my fingertips. Danielle turned to leave, but paused at the door. And about your ex-wife? I didn't look up from my coffee. She made her choice. She can live with it. Danielle nodded and left. For a moment, I allowed myself to lean back and close my eyes. The past few days had been an all-out war, but I had emerged exactly where I needed to be, at the top. And I wasn't about to let anyone drag me back down. By noon, I received another call from her. I ignored it. By 12:30, a message came through. We need to talk. I smirked at the simplicity of it, as if a few words could undo everything. By 1 o'clock, she sent another. Please. That one made me pause. Not because I felt anything for her. I didn't. That part of me had been erased the moment she sat at that dinner table and let her father dictate my replacement. No, I paused because I recognized desperation when I saw it. And desperate people were unpredictable. By 1:45, I arrived at the boardroom. Executives were already seated, their postures stiff, their eyes watchful. They had spent years under my father-in-law's rule, conditioned to follow his lead. Now, they were looking at me, unsure of what to expect. I let the silence stretch as I took my seat at the head of the table. Let's not waste time, I said, steepling my fingers. I know there are concerns. I know some of you were aligned with my predecessor. But let me make one thing clear. This company doesn't run on loyalty to a name. It runs on results. A few of them shifted in their seats. We're not going to waste time mourning the past, I continued. We're going to move forward. And those who are ready to do that, you'll be rewarded. The tension in the room eased slightly. These were business-minded people. They didn't care about sentiment, they cared about profit. And if I could make them more money than my father-in-law ever did, they would fall in line. I spent the next hour laying out my strategy, expanding global operations, restructuring inefficient departments, securing new international partnerships. By the time the meeting ended, the board was no longer uncertain. They were intrigued, and I had them exactly where I wanted them. That night, as I was leaving the office, I saw her. She was waiting in the lobby, standing near the entrance in a fitted gray dress, looking as polished as ever. I could have walked past her. I could have ignored her completely, but a part of me wanted to hear what she had to say, if only to watch her scramble for an explanation. So I stopped. She looked up, relief flashing across her face. You finally decided to see me. No, I said simply. I just didn't feel like pretending you don't exist. She flinched slightly, but recovered quickly. Can we talk? In private? I studied her for a long moment. Then, without a word, I turned and walked toward the side exit. I knew she would follow. Outside, the night air was crisp, the city lights reflecting in the glass windows of the building I now fully controlled. She wrapped her arms around herself, hesitating. I didn't want this, she finally said. I laughed, shaking my head. You stood by and watched it happen. She stopped herself, frustration flickering in her eyes. I didn't know how to stop it. You didn't try, I said coldly. Silence stretched between us. I made a mistake, she admitted finally. I nodded, shoving my hands in my pockets. Yes, you did. Her lips parted slightly, as if she had been expecting a different response. She exhaled. I just want to know if there's any way to fix this. I looked at her then, really looked at her. She had been the woman I once trusted, once believed in, and now she was just another person who had underestimated me. No, I said, my voice even. You don't get to fix this. You don't get to rewrite the ending. Her eyes flashed with something. Anger, regret, maybe even grief. But none of it mattered. I turned and walked away, because some things weren't meant to be salvaged, and she had made her choice. As I walked away from her, I didn't look back. There was no need. Whatever desperation she was feeling now, whatever regret had crept into her heart, it was too little, too late. She had watched me be discarded like an afterthought, had stood silent as her father tried to erase me from my own empire. And now, she wanted to fix things? There was nothing left to fix. I stepped into my car, exhaling slowly as I gripped the steering wheel. My phone vibrated in my pocket, and I already knew who it was before I even glanced at the screen. Another message from her. Please, just one conversation. I didn't bother responding. Instead, I turned off my notifications and pulled out of the parking lot. There was work to be done, a company to run, a future to secure. The past could keep calling, keep begging, but I was done answering. By the time I got home, my body was exhausted, but my mind was sharp. I poured myself a drink, stepping onto the balcony of my penthouse. The city sprawled before me, alive and endless, glittering under the night sky. I had won. Everything they had tried to take from me, I had taken back, and more. The company was mine now, fully mine, and for the first time in years, I didn't have to answer to anyone. No father-in-law dictating my future. No wife standing in the shadows, complicit in my downfall. So why did I feel this quiet, lingering sense of anticipation? Because I knew the game wasn't over yet. People like my father-in-law didn't just walk away. They regrouped. They retaliated. And I was ready for it. The next morning, I was back in my office before the sun had even fully risen. Danielle was already there, as always, her efficiency unmatched. She slid a file onto my desk before I had even taken my seat. You were right, she said simply. I flipped open the file and scanned the contents. A meeting had taken place last night. My father-in-law, a few of his old allies, a handful of investors who had benefited from his reign. They're looking for a way back in, Danielle continued, trying to gather support, frame you as reckless, unstable. I smirked, setting the file down. They're desperate. Desperate men do dangerous things. She wasn't wrong. Do we have leverage on any of the investors? I asked, already knowing the answer. Danielle nodded, flipping to another page in the file. 3 of them have questionable financial histories. Offshore accounts, unreported earnings, some borderline legal dealings. If they push too hard, we can squeeze them. And the rest? 2 of them are just waiting to see who comes out on top. They don't care who runs the company, as long as their money keeps growing. Then we make sure they know where the real power is. I picked up my phone and dialed the number of the most influential investor on that list. A man who had built his fortune on the backs of others, who had never truly cared about loyalty, only profit. He answered on the second ring. I was expecting your call. Then you already know why I'm calling, I said smoothly. He chuckled. Your father-in-law has been very persuasive. He thinks you're too aggressive, too impulsive. He's making a case that the company is better off under someone calmer. And what do you think? I asked. A pause. Then, I think I like making money. And right now, you're the one making it. I smiled. Glad we understand each other. He chuckled again. For now. But power shifts quickly in this world. Be careful, son. I always am. I hung up and turned to Danielle. That's one secured. Now let's deal with the others. By noon, I had locked in the majority of the key investors. They were staying with me, at least for now. That left my father-in-law with fewer allies, fewer options, and fewer chances to claw his way back. At exactly 3 p.m., my office phone rang. I picked it up without hesitation. I was wondering when you'd call. You're making a mistake. My father-in-law's voice came through, calm but firm. You keep saying that, but I'm still here. And you? You're not. A pause. Then, this isn't over. I smirked, leaning back in my chair. It is for you. Silence. Enjoy your retirement, I said, then hung up. I exhaled, setting the phone down. Game over. That night, I returned home and found another message waiting. From her. I miss you. I stared at the words for a long moment, then deleted the message without responding. She had chosen her side, and I had one. I stepped out onto my balcony, the city stretching before me. For the first time in years, I was exactly where I was meant to be. Untouchable, unstoppable, and finally, free. By the next morning, the dust had settled, but the game wasn't over. Power struggles never truly ended. They just shifted, reshaped themselves into new battles, new challenges. The difference now? I was the one holding the sword. I arrived at the office before sunrise, the city still waking up as I stepped into the towering glass building that bore my legacy. Employees were moving through the halls, whispering, stealing glances my way. They weren't used to this version of me, the man who had once worked silently in the background, now the man in charge. Danielle was waiting in my office, already scanning through her tablet. She barely glanced up as she spoke. Your ex-wife was seen leaving her father's house late last night. Sources say she's distancing herself from him. I smirked. Of course she is. She sees the writing on the wall. Danielle finally looked up, giving me a pointed look. You think she's doing this for you? I let out a short laugh, shaking my head. No, she's doing it for herself. Because that's who she was. She had spent years aligning herself with power, making sure she was always on the winning side. Now that her father had been cast out, she was looking for a way to reclaim her position. What do you want to do about it? Danielle asked. I leaned back, considering. Nothing. Let her flail. Let her wonder if I'll let her back in. Let her feel what I felt the moment she betrayed me. Danielle nodded, not arguing. She knew better than anyone. I didn't act out of emotion. I acted out of strategy. What else? I asked, shifting my focus back to business. The remaining board members are aligned with you, at least for now. The investors who were on the fence have backed down. But there's still one problem. I arched an eyebrow. And that is? She slid a document onto my desk. Your father-in-law still has influence. He may not have ownership, but he has connections. If he wants to make things difficult for you, he can. I glanced over the document. It detailed his remaining assets, his political ties, his ability to manipulate certain markets. He's not done fighting, I mused. No, Danielle agreed. He's just waiting for an opening. I exhaled slowly, tapping my fingers against the desk. Then I won't give him one. Schedule a meeting with the board, I said. I want everything airtight before he makes his next move. Already on it, she said, stepping out of the office. I turned my chair toward the window, gazing out over the city. This was the part no one ever talked about, what happened after you won. People assumed victory was the end, but it never was. Power had to be maintained, defended, strengthened, and I wasn't about to let anyone take it from me again. By noon, the boardroom was packed. The atmosphere was different now. No more uncertainty, no more divided loyalties. They all knew where the power lay. We're going to discuss expansion, I said, scanning the room. Hastings Enterprises is no longer just a domestic firm. We're taking it global. A few surprised glances. Some nodded, already considering the implications. We've relied too long on old strategies, I continued. We were reactive. Now, we're going to be proactive. New markets, new investments. We don't sit back and wait for opportunities. We create them. An executive shifted in his seat. That's going to require aggressive funding. I smiled. I'm aware. Danielle slid another document across the table. We've already begun securing private capital. Within the next 3 months, We'll have the liquidity needed to make our first international acquisition. Murmurs of approval. My father-in-law had spent years treating this company like his personal kingdom, using it to consolidate power rather than actually grow it. That was his biggest mistake. He played defense. I wasn't going to. I was going to conquer. That night, as I was leaving the office, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I already knew who it was. I answered, bringing the phone to my ear without speaking. A slow exhale on the other end. You've made your point. I smirked. Have I? A pause. Then, you think you've won. You think this is over. It is over, I said, stepping into my car. You just don't want to accept it. You're playing a dangerous game, son. I'm not playing anymore. You are. And you lost. Silence. Retire, I continued. Enjoy what's left of your influence before it disappears completely. Because if you come at me again, I won't just take your company. I'll take your legacy. A long pause. Then, finally, you really are ruthless. You taught me well, I said before hanging up. I set my phone down, exhaling. That was the last time my father-in-law ever tried to challenge me. 3 months later, Hastings Enterprises secured its first international acquisition, expanding into European markets. The numbers skyrocketed. I watched from my office window as the stock price climbed, the city lights reflecting in the glass. I had won. Not just the battle, the war. And no one would ever take this from me again. That night, I got another text. From her. I still love you. I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. I don't. And with that, I blocked her number. Because power isn't just about winning. It's about knowing when to walk away. And I was never looking back. The city never truly slept, and neither did power. While the rest of the world moved through their routines, I was already steps ahead, calculating my next move. Power wasn't just about holding on, it was about expanding. And if my father-in-law had spent decades defending his empire, I was going to spend the next decade building mine bigger than he ever imagined. The office was quieter than usual when I arrived the next morning, my footsteps echoing in the executive hallway. Hastings Enterprises had already begun its global expansion, and the first phase of international acquisitions was locked in. But there was still work to do. Danielle was waiting for me, as always, a fresh folder in her hands. Numbers from our latest acquisition, she said, handing it over. I flipped it open, scanning the reports. The company we had just acquired was already proving to be a gold mine. Revenue up 17% in the first quarter, with even higher projections for the next fiscal year. This is good, I said, nodding. It's more than good, she corrected. It's a statement. The market knows you're not just holding ground, you're growing. That was exactly the point. My father-in-law had spent years playing safe, keeping the company in familiar territory. But power wasn't about safety, it was about dominance. Any pushback? I asked. Not from the board, she said. But your ex-wife has been making calls. I didn't react. To who? Some of the investors. A few of the remaining executives who were loyal to her father. I exhaled slowly, tapping my fingers against my desk. She's looking for a way back in, Danielle continued, trying to leverage whatever influence she has left. And how are they responding? So far, they're ignoring her. But if she keeps pushing, someone might listen. That was the problem with people like her. They never accepted when they had lost. She had aligned herself with power her entire life, always making sure she was on the winning side. And now, for the first time, she was powerless. Let her try, I said finally. It won't change anything. Danielle hesitated. She also showed up at the building again this morning. Security turned her away. I chuckled, shaking my head. She's getting desperate, Danielle noted. Let her be, I said simply. Danielle studied me for a moment, then nodded. She didn't need to say it, but I could hear the unspoken words in her silence. This isn't over. And maybe, in her mind, it wasn't. But for me, it had been over the moment she let me be erased. By mid-afternoon, I was on a conference call with a potential partner in Dubai, discussing another major acquisition. We were expanding fast, and the world was paying attention. Your reputation precedes you, the man on the other end of the call said. The way you handled your transition of power was ruthless. I smiled slightly. Business isn't personal. Oh, but it is, he chuckled. Every move you make tells the world who you are. And right now, the world is watching. I knew that. I welcomed it. By the time the call ended, I had secured another partnership, and Hastings Enterprises was another step closer to becoming a global powerhouse. I had built an empire that no one, not my ex-wife, not her father, not their failed schemes, could take from me. And that was only the beginning. That evening, I stepped into my penthouse, the city lights stretching endlessly beyond the glass walls. A drink in my hand. My phone vibrated once more. Another message. From her. I should have ignored it, but something in me wanted to see what she had to say. I opened it. I just want to talk. One last time. I exhaled, setting my drink down. I didn't know her anything, but I wanted to see what her last move would be. So, against my better judgment, I sent a single response. Tomorrow. Noon. My office. The next day, at exactly noon, she walked into my office. She was still as polished as ever, still carried herself with the same effortless confidence. But there was something different now, a hesitation in her step, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. She took a seat across from me, crossing her legs carefully. "You look good," she said after a moment. I didn't respond. I just studied her. She sighed. "I don't know how to start this conversation." "Then don't." Her jaw tightened slightly, but she forced a small smile. "I made a mistake." "You made a choice," I corrected. "And it was the wrong one," she admitted. I tilted my head slightly. "Didn't seem wrong when you sat across from me at that dinner table, letting your father replace me like an employee past his expiration date." She flinched at that. "Good." "I was stupid," she said, her voice quieter. "I let my father control everything. I let him make the decisions, thinking it was what was best for me. But I see now." She swallowed. "I see that I lost the one thing that actually mattered." I leaned back, watching her. "And what was that?" I asked, my voice unreadable. She hesitated. "You." I laughed. I didn't even mean to. It just came out. "You didn't lose me," I said, shaking my head. "You threw me away. There's a difference." Her eyes flickered with emotion. "Do you really hate me that much?" I exhaled slowly. "No, I don't hate you. I just don't care anymore." She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw the realization dawn in her eyes. This wasn't a game she could win. Not this time. "You wanted to talk," I said, standing up. "Now we've talked. I have work to do." She rose to her feet, looking like she wanted to say more. But in the end, she didn't. She just nodded once, turned, and walked out of my office. And this time, I knew she wouldn't come back. As the door shut behind her, I exhaled. Not because I felt relief. Not because I felt anger. Because, for the first time in a long time, I felt absolutely nothing. And that meant I had truly won. The door clicked shut behind her, and for the first time since this war began, I felt nothing. No rage, no regret, no satisfaction. Just a cold, quiet finality. It was over. She had walked out of my life the moment she let her father erase me. And today, I had returned the favor. I turned back to my desk, my fingers grazing the sleek surface as I exhaled. There were no more distractions, no more betrayals to uncover, no more battles left to fight. I had one. And yet, the city outside my office window kept moving, untouched by the war I had waged and won. The world didn't stop for victory. Neither could I. My phone buzzed. Danielle's voice came through the speaker. "The reporters are still requesting an interview. They want to know your official statement now that everything is settled." I smirked, shaking my head. "Let them speculate." I didn't owe anyone an explanation. "Understood," she said. A pause. "By the way, your ex-wife just left the building." "I know." She looked different, not as sure of herself. "She'll adjust," I said simply. Danielle didn't press further. She never did. She understood me better than most. "One more thing," she said. "Your father-in-law has officially stepped down from all his remaining positions. He's off every board, out of every financial circle. The investors have cut ties. He's irrelevant now." I nodded. Good. That was the final piece. The last loose thread. He had spent decades ruling from behind a desk, controlling people like pieces on a chessboard. He had built a name, a reputation, a legacy. And now, he was just another forgotten businessman. Poetic. There's one last issue, Danielle said carefully. His lawyers reached out. He's requesting a meeting. I exhaled. Of course he is. He wouldn't go down without trying to salvage something. Some piece of his power, some remnant of his former life. Set it up, I said. My office. Tomorrow. Are you sure? I want to see the look on his face when he realizes there's nothing left for him to take. Danielle didn't argue. Tomorrow. 10 a.m., she confirmed. I hung up, staring out at the city. Tomorrow, I would bury the past for good. The final meeting. At exactly 10 a.m., my office door swung open. My father-in-law walked in, but he wasn't the same man he had been months ago. Gone was the confidence, the arrogance, the quiet certainty that he was always in control. He looked old, small, defeated. He took a seat without waiting for permission, but there was no power in the gesture. I won't waste time, he said, his voice rougher than before. I know what you think of me. I know you believe this is over. I didn't respond. I just watched him. But you don't understand something, he continued, leaning forward slightly. Power never truly disappears. It shifts. Today, you have it. But tomorrow? It could be someone else. I smiled slightly. Is that a warning? It's a lesson, he said, one I had to learn the hard way. One day, someone younger, smarter, and hungrier than you will come for what you built. And if you're not careful, you'll be sitting in this chair, having this conversation. I studied him. He wasn't wrong. Power was never permanent. It had to be defended, strengthened, reinvented. But I wasn't him. I hadn't built my empire on family loyalty or empty favors. I had built it on strategy, control, and absolute leverage. I appreciate the advice, I said smoothly, but I'm not you, and I won't make your mistakes. He exhaled, shaking his head. We'll see. Silence stretched between us. Why are you here? I asked. I want one thing, he said finally, a seat at the table. I laughed, shaking my head. You had a seat. You lost it. I built this company. And I built it into something bigger than you ever could, I countered. This isn't your legacy anymore. It's mine. His jaw tightened. Then at least let me buy back in, he pushed. Name your price. There is no price. A flicker of something crossed his face. Frustration. Maybe even desperation. You're shutting me out completely? You shut yourself out, I said simply. You made a choice. Now, you live with it. His hands curled into fists on the desk, but there was nothing left for him to fight. You'll regret this, he muttered. No, I said. You will. He stood abruptly, shoving his chair back. I hope you enjoy this power while it lasts, he said. Because one day, you'll look around and realize you're alone. I met his gaze without flinching. Alone is better than betrayed, I said. He hesitated for a fraction of a second. Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. And just like that, the war was truly over. The legacy they couldn't steal. That evening, I sat in my office, the city stretching before me. Everything had changed. The company was mine, the empire was secured, and the people who had tried to take it from me were gone. I had built something no one could steal. Not my ex-wife. Not her father. Not anyone. And now? Now, I wasn't just defending my power. I was expanding it. A knock at the door. Danielle stepped in, her expression unreadable. You did it. Of course I did. She nodded, then hesitated. So what now? I smirked, leaning back in my chair.
Now?
I echoed. Now, I make sure no one ever forgets who built this empire. She studied me for a moment, then smiled slightly. I never doubted you. As she left, I turned back to the city. They tried to erase me. They tried to replace me. They failed. Because Hastings Enterprises wasn't just a business anymore. It was my legacy. And I would make sure no one ever took it from me again.